Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post. I am your host, Ghadi Francis, and this is our weekly show where we bring you all the latest developments in one of the world's most volatile regions, my soil, my home, West Asia. This week, we have an episode packed with news and stories. But first, let's take a look at what's making the headlines across this region.
Israeli security forces killed 2 Palestinians suspected of carrying shooting attack against the police. Officials say the 2 were killed in gunfire exchange in a Nablus raid. Iran joins the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as the Eurasian bloc seeks to forge closer ties. President Ibrahim Raisi says Tehran wants to share its experience with the grouping so its members can move towards a terrorist-free region. Russian Defense Ministry releases footage of its Air Force conducting joint drills with Syrian fleet. Aim of the exercises is to ensure control over Syrian airspace and to test the efficiency of air defenses of the Russian task force stationed in the country.
Misery, grief, and anger have taken over the West Bank in Palestine. Many innocent people were killed this week as Israel started its unprecedented attack on Jenin. After 3 days of violence, this settlement in the West Bank looks like a massacre site. How did this start? What comes next? What will happen to all these people? WION tries to answer all these questions in the coming report.
Resilience and defiance. The Palestinian spirit emboldens as thousands line up on the streets to bury their dead a day after Israel withdrew its forces from the West Bank settlement. This week saw the worst attack on the Palestinian colony in recent years. Over 1,000 Israeli soldiers entered Jenin by foot and on tanks. They fired guns, threw bombs, targeted missiles from the air. Scenes similar to a massacre emerged in West Bank. After 2 days of the deadly Israeli assault, Palestinians are returning home, inspecting the damage done. The homes are flattened, the camp's narrow roads and alleyways destroyed, in what Israel justifies as a crackdown on militant hideouts after recent attacks.
The destruction that happened in the camp is enormous. A whole machined army, dozens of bulldozers entered the camp and destroyed the entire infrastructure. As you can see, the streets, the water lines, the sewage system, even the rainwater drainage system. The electrical lines were hit the first day. They targeted the generators and disconnected electricity. As for communication, the internet, phones and so on, this didn't exist in the first place.
The attack on the Jenin refugee camp in the northern West Bank was the largest in 2 decades. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the Israeli army launched a large-scale aerial attack using unmanned missile-loaded planes to shell parts of the camp. They flattened the ground before the soldiers trooped in for a raid and remained there for approximately 48 hours. At least 1,000 soldiers and dozens of armored vehicles were involved in the assault. No less than 3,000 people were forced to flee their homes in Jenin for fear of being killed.
So it's a horrific situation. It's a barbaric situation by the Israeli occupying forces in which they used aircrafts, they used large number of forces and infantries and mechanized units to attack this small refugee camp.
Palestinian officials say 12 people were killed in the attacks, including 3 children, while at least 120 were injured. Israel says 11 of these casualties were militants. But innocent Palestinians mourning their loved ones have a different story to tell.
How can he be a terrorist? He's 19 years old and the ones younger than him are 16 and 15. You call them terrorists? And those who have bombs and planes are not terrorists? And those who fire missiles? What if there are women in the area? Kids? They don't know what they're hitting. They drop the missiles and they don't know who it hits. God is great. That's all. God is great.
Arab states soon huddled as Israel continued its attack on Jenin. The Arab League issued its statement, called the raids similar to war crimes. The military operation made things diplomatically awkward for the 4 Arab states that have signed peace pacts, known as the Abraham Accords, with Israel. Moreover, it made the already distant prospect of setting up ties with Saudi Arabia even more distant. While the leaders issued strong statements, people in West Asia took to the streets to raise their voices against Israeli occupation. From Lebanon to Jordan, Saudi to Kuwait, thousands marched in support of the Palestinian cause. After withdrawing its troops, the Israeli military said it has achieved its goals for now. They have wiped out a weapons depot and command center in Jenin. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the quote-unquote operation a success.
If Jenin goes back to terrorism, we'll go back to Jenin. And it will happen faster and stronger than anyone can imagine.
For years, Jenin has been a sore spot for Israel. It has not managed to crush the tides of resistance in one of the oldest refugee camps despite many efforts. It has not managed to crush the tides of resistance in one of the oldest refugee camps despite many efforts. In the last 1 year especially, Jenin and its nearby areas, including those falling in the Israeli-occupied northern West Bank, have seen routine raids. It only worsened after the far-right government took over last year. Many of the Palestinian groups and militant organizations have their centers in Jenin. It was the arena of some of the worst bloodshed during the Second Intifada, a hotbed of resistance that burns every time there is a new Israeli attack or strike. Has the Israeli military achieved a win? Or did they make a point by destroying all the infrastructure of the refugee camp? It will come to be known in time. But there is one thing for sure. Every attack deepens the source of the rising rage and motivates the resistance in a city known for always fighting back.
And now to Turkey. It looks like the Turkish inflation levels have cooled down after all. In many months, it is the first time that the levels have reached a little less than the projections. Now, as the lira makes things tough, with the new Erdogan economy team focusing on reversing unorthodox policies that tethered the currency, will it bear fruit? Here's the story from Turkey.
Tangible but short-lived relief for the Turks. For the first time in months, inflation has cooled. The country's annual inflation rate slowed to 38.2% in June, slightly less than the forecast and 1.7% lower than the May figures. Turkey's official inflation rate has been steadily dropping since reaching a more than 2-decade high of 85% last year. And while official numbers spell good news, economists think otherwise. Experts have said that inflation will soon start growing faster, and they expect it to reach 40% again. All thanks to the vast spending pledges meted out by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan before the May election.
Türkiye'yi çok seviyoruz.
While inflation declined from what was expected, the lira's exchange value has dropped faster than imagined. The lira has lost more than 23% of its value against the dollar since Erdogan's re-election. The steep value decline underscores a radical shift in policies the new Erdogan cabinet brought about. A new government also meant a new economic policy. Turkey's finances have been a subject of concern for a few years now. A bad economy and cost of living crisis is what posed the biggest electoral challenge to Erdogan. On top of it all was a devastating earthquake that claimed over 50,000 lives and flattened nearly one-fourth of the country. The threat of another inflation spiral added urgency for newly installed Finance Minister Mehmet Şimşek and Central Bank Governor Hafize Gaye Erkan. Policymakers have hinted at a gradual return to an orthodox economic approach, this as they reduced support for the lira and raised interest rates for the first time in over 2 years. In the middle of June, Turkey's central bank hiked its interest rate by 650 basis points.
But I think with the current interest rate, which is not going to be sufficient to generate significant inflow of capital, so reserve supply probably is not going to increase enough to offset pressures on Turkish lira. And I expect the continuation of central banks' implicit interventions to the currency market. Yet, because the net reserves are negative, there isn't unlimited resources to inject money as we did before. So most likely, depreciation in Turkish lira is going to continue following this rate hike, but the pace will be determined by central banks' implicit interventions as well as the signals about future rate hikes.
Economists have welcomed Erdogan's turn to more traditional economics. They are urging his team to finish the course faster. While many in the sphere praise the switch, Erdogan himself is not a fan. The Turkish president believes high interest rates contribute to, rather than cure, growing consumer prices. 2 years ago, it was Erdogan that pushed the central bank to cut borrowing rates. 2021 is remembered as the year that set off the worst inflationary spiral of his rule. Will the new economic approach undo the deeds of the past? Or will Turkey see a repeat of recent history?
China's infamously notorious debt trap has reached West Asia. Looks like Jordan might be the latest victim. The kingdom's government and Beijing struck a deal years ago. This deal aimed at making Jordan more self-sufficient in energies. But it looks like once functional, this dragon deal might send the kingdom's wallets just bleeding. Listen in.
It was envisioned as a landmark project, a power plant that would suffice Jordan's energy needs, generate a surplus to boost its economy. Instead, weeks after its official opening, the Atarat power plant has been at the center of heated controversy. This very power plant might have made Jordan the latest victim of the infamously notorious Chinese debt trap. The West Asian kingdom is on the hook for billions of dollars in Chinese debt. All credit to the deal signed for the project's inception. For the longest time, Jordan was among the very few West Asian nations with meager resources. But everything changed nearly a decade ago. Jordan hit the jackpot. It struck shale oil trapped in the black rock that underlies the country. In 2012, the Jordanian Atarat Power Company proposed to the government to extract shale oil and build a plant, using it to provide 15% of the country's electricity supply. The proposal fit the government's intensifying desire for energy self-sufficiency amid the turmoil of the 2011 Arab uprisings. But extraction proved expensive, risky, and technologically challenging. Unfortunately, there were no bidders for the once claimed landmark project. Chinese banks offered Jordan over $1.6 billion in loans to finance the plant. In 2017, a Chinese state-owned firm, Guangdong Energy Group, became the majority shareholder in the Atarat Power Company. At the same time, Jordan struck a $15 billion agreement to import vast amounts of natural gas at competitive prices from Israel in 2014.
Jordan no longer really requires the energy that will be provided by Atarat, but part of the deal, which is so typical of what the Chinese do, is that the price for the sale of the energy from the factory, from Atarat to the state energy company, is above market rate. And so when this plant starts to operate, Jordan will run several $100 million deficit a year. It's just not economical.
Under their 30-year power purchase deal, Jordan's state-run electricity company will have to buy electricity from the now Chinese majority Atarat. That, too, at an exorbitant rate. Jordanian Treasury says the government would lose $280 million annually once the project gets operational. To cover these payments, Jordan will have to raise electricity prices by 17%, a slap in the face of millions who already battle inflation and a cost of living crisis. In 2020, Jordan's Ministry of Energy launched international arbitration against Atarat Power Co. The grounds for the appeal were gross unfairness. As of early June, energy officials were flying to London for hearings at an arbitration tribunal of the Paris-based International Chamber of Commerce.
Problem is Jordan owes this money to China and has brought them to arbitration in Paris based on the gross unfairness of the contract. Nevertheless, I think Jordan is worried, even if the arbitration succeeds, that China will look to punish Jordan, as it has done with so many other countries.
This project and the loan are not providing energy for now, but is fueling tensions between Beijing and Amman. The verdict is far away. China maintains it has never forced anyone to loan money from them, says Beijing pulls no political move in such situations. But with time as witness and many South Asian nations' fates as proof, it is as tricky to get out of the Chinese debt trap as easy it is to get their investments.
From Jordan to Iraq, Mesopotamia. People in Iraq with very little resources are now resorting to different kinds of medicines. With little income, some people are now turning to herbal traditional medicine because they cannot afford real medicine. Listen in.
Muhammad is visiting a medicinal herb shop. She suffers from a skin ailment. And in an ideal world, she would have been prescribed medicines by her dermatologist. But unfortunately, in present-day Iraq, even medicines are a luxury. The pills for her skin ailment cost about 800,000 dinars. That's around $610. With the striking cost and no money in the pocket, the 34-year-old turned to a herbal remedy shop, just like many of her relatives.
Pharmacies are a disaster at the moment. Poor people turn to herbal medicine because of the prices. Prices are high. It has become a trade. Each pharmacy has different prices. I went to a pharmacy and getting the prescription would have cost me 800,000 Iraqi dinars. Who can afford this? Should one die? So you turn to medical herbs. It is much cheaper.
Several such herbal shops have opened up in the capital Baghdad recently. There are now 460 establishments with a permit to sell herbal medicines, up from 350 in 2020. People consider herbal medicines a part of their heritage and pay little heed to the science behind it, or question if there is any. This is Ibrahim Al-Jabouri, He is the owner of a herbal remedy shop. A pharmacist by education, Ibrahim prescribes herbal medicines to people suffering from skin to lifestyle diseases.
There are some people, the smallest number, who tell you that they have an inflammation of the urinary tract. This is a simple ailment. They either go to the doctor or do an ultrasound and the like. So they might prefer to pay only a small amount for, I'm not saying any kind of medicinal herbs, but herbal medicine that are recognized by the Ministry of Health, by the National Center for Herbal Medicine, and is registered at the Health Ministry. Maybe the patient can benefit from these.
There was a time when Iraq's healthcare was the best across West Asia. But years of war, the wreckage of conflict, and international involvement have brought the system to its knees. The state healthcare as of today faces shortage of basic necessities like medicine and equipment. This leaves patients with no choice but to visit expensive private hospitals.
In reality, we did not manage to establish a medical system that suits the needs of the Iraqi citizen, and we did not manage to put up a monitoring system to oversee private and non-governmental institutions, such as pharmacies, medical centers, and health centers, or even government hospitals, and enforcing fixed prices for medicines. This is what led to such situations.
Replacing medical prescription with herbal drugs might not be the smartest option. It can do more harm than good if not administered properly. The need of the hour is citizen-centric policies, one that offers Iraqis proper treatment and not to force them down the archaic road.
Well, in this show, we often say about West Asia it is one of the most volatile regions in the world. But the region is not only defined by wars and misery. In this region, ancient history, whether it's Mesopotamia, Syria, the Levant, Palestine, the Holy Land, the GCC, it is packed with culture and stories. Last week, in Baalbek ruins, one of the oldest Roman ruins in the globe, in Lebanon, there was a music festival, and in this music festival, some Syrian artists, after almost a decade, performed one of the most important traditions in this region, the Sufism, the Islamic and the Arab Sufism and dervish performances. Take a look. That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, always bringing you the most recent updates, news and stories from the most volatile region in the world, West Asia. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis signing off from Lebanon, and keep on watching WION World is One.